Well, hello there. I didn't see you come in. Make yourself at home. Have a drink. While I give some attention to some underappreciated characters and storylines that I personally love. And I hope you grow to love as well.
Hey there, everybody, and welcome back. Today we are reading Swamp Thing number 159. And just a little catch up on what's been going on. We have just completed the story arc called River Run, which ended with Swamp Thing becoming the elemental guardian of the Parliament of Waves. So now he is guardian over the plant life on Earth, the minerals of Earth, because he can control stones and stuff. And now that he is the guardian of the Parliament of Waves, he can control all types of bodies of water. And that is where we left off in the last issue, with Swamp Thing finally completing the last task, become the guardian of water, and then he returned to Louisiana. So first things first, with issue 159, we start off with the cover. This one is definitely eye-catching because it's got Swamp Thing's head on a platter on top of a dinner table with a bunch of other foods, and it looks super realistic, like almost as if it's a photograph and not a drawing. There are certain parts of it, like his face, which is very angry as it grits its teeth and it looks out at us from the table. And that seems drawn maybe in this image of a photograph. But either way, it's a pretty cool cover, and it's definitely one that would catch your eye on the stands. We also see on this cover that this is written by Mark Millar with art by Jill Thompson. And as we turn to the first page, we see that this issue takes place in Motherwell, Scotland. We start off with two teenage boys walking down the street, and one of them says, "It's been 2 weeks, Jerry. I don't think I can take much more of this." And Jerry replies, "What did I tell you? Nobody can give up wanking for more than a day and a half." And the friend replies, "I never said I was giving it up forever, you arsehole. I'm just doing it for Lent. The worst thing was, I found a porno down in the woods. I said I wouldn't look at it, so I've kept it under my bed for Easter Sunday. It's driving me daft." And Jerry jokingly says, "Maybe you should give sweets up next year. It's 1,000,000 times easier." And then the boys turn a corner to where Jerry lives, and they see a coach and buggy waiting outside the front door. And this is a good time to describe the children, because they look like totally normal 90s kids. Jerry has short blonde wavy hair, and his friend has dark hair on top, and then he has an undercut on the sides and back. And I remember many kids in my middle school that had this haircut. But other than that, they're both wearing the same thing: jeans, some sort of school uniform shirt and tie, and then a hoodie or jacket over that. So the horse and buggy seem kind of out of place because it does seem like it is the 90s. And as Jerry's friend sees the horse and buggy, he says, "Hey, check this. Looks like we've got visitors." But it seems that these visitors are not something good, because as the kids walk into the courtyard of Jerry's house, they see the parents are just standing there crying. And as the two young boys walk into the house, Jerry's friend says, "What's wrong with your mom? She looks like she's crying." And Jerry replies, "Ah, shite. I hope nobody's dead." Then the boys go back out to the parents in the courtyard, and they can hear the dad saying, "Christ almighty, baby. How did we get into this mess?" And as the boys go up to them, Jerry asks them, "What's happening, Mom? Is something wrong?" And the mom looks down at him with shameful tears in her eyes and says, "Oh, shite. You tell him, Frank." Then Frank squats down in front of his son, Jerry, and with tears in his eyes, he looks at him and says, "You know how hard it's been these few last months, boy. We haven't had a penny to spare since I lost my job." Then the dad puts his hand on Jerry's shoulder, and Jerry notices something in the corner where his dog used to be tied up. There's nothing there now, just a rope with a stake in the ground. And as Jerry sees this, he asks his dad, "Where's the dog? Where's Scooby?" Then the dad unfolds something that was in his hand, and we see it's a dog collar, and there's a tag on it that says Scooby. And the dad says, "They gave me a really good price for him, Jerry. I couldn't say no. I'm sorry, son. I really am." And Jerry looks very shocked and horrified as his dad hands the collar to him. Then we see the horse and buggy drive off into the night. And as we turn the page, we cut to what looks like a castle, a very old-looking stone building that is by itself in the Scottish countryside. We also see on this page that the name of this issue is called Swamp Dog. And also there's a little dedication on this issue that says, "Dedicated to Scooby Miller. We miss you, pal." So apparently Mark Millar wrote this for his dog that had passed recently. And as we turn the page, we see a car that is driving up some winding roads that lead to this castle in the middle of nowhere, and the narration over this says, "The club was formed in 1888, and its members were as hungry as ever. It was founded by a portly Scottish laird with a craving for food and an obsessive lust for variety." And in the panel under this narration, we're seeing a lot of people get out and go up the large steps into the front door of this castle. One of them, who has a wheelchair, even has servants that brings them up the stairs. And as they go inside, they see a red carpet that leads to some more stairs up to the dining room. And the narration continues. "Its membership was secret and exclusive, comprised only of those with the most sophisticated palates. 3 rules govern the Criain Larrick Hotel's gastronomy society. To break any one of them would mean immediate expulsion." Then we see some female servers bringing out different courses of food that are on covered silver pallets and putting them on the table, and the narration continues. "The first of these rules states that the club must meet on the Good Friday of every year. No one is sure why this date is so specific. The second rule is that each member must bring with him a meal that no one has ever tasted, a task that becomes more difficult with every passing year. But the final rule is the most strict of all. It states that each of the members must eat whatever the others care to bring, without exception." Then we cut to a little bit later as all the rich guests are mingling together. And as you can imagine, they're all a bunch of old white guys. And at this point in the night, they're all just kind of standing around eating hors d'oeuvres as they talk. And one of the men says, "Absolutely delicious, Sir James. What did you say this was called?" And Sir James answers, "The excrement of a Yeti, old boy, a favorite among the movers and shakers of Tibet." And the man who asked the question says, "Splendid, absolutely splendid. I must say that this year's supper looks most impressive, gentlemen." Then we cut to 2 different gentlemen standing by the table, and they look a little bit younger than the others. One of them has blonde hair and the other has red, and he also has an eye patch. So the blonde-haired man asks, "What about you, Sir Edward? What have you been hiding under that silver tray all evening?" And Sir Edward replies, It does look a bit ominous, doesn't it? I've decided to opt for the salad this year, Viscount Tennant." Then Sir Edward walks over to his silver tray and he lifts up the cover, and as Viscount Tennant sees what's underneath, he exclaims, "Good God, are you out of your mind?" And as we turn the page, we see what was revealed to him, and it is an old rotting head of Swamp Thing, like one of the ones from Swamp Thing's discarded bodies when he leaves to go into the green. And this thing definitely looks like it's been there for a while. There's mushrooms growing out of it, and it's starting to lose its shape as it's rotted, so the head looks kind of deflated. So as Viscount Tennant and Sir James, who was talking to the other guy, stare at this head in horror, Sir Edward just coolly and calmly walks over to the fireplace and lights up his smoking pipe and says, "Don't worry, gentlemen, it's quite dead. You may recognize the beast from the Sunday supplements. It's the head of the Louisiana swamp monster, one of its many heads to be precise. I have a chap who finds tasty things to eat in the southern states of America. He came across this little beauty floating in a bog and crawling with insects." Then one of the other club members says, "Bravo, old man." Then Sir Edward walks forward towards a gentleman who looks a bit older than everybody else, and I think he was the one in the carriage and buggy from earlier. And Sir Edward says to him, "What about you, Sir Norman? I understand you were having trouble finding a suitable meal tonight." And Sir Norman says, "I simply took the time to locate a meal which reflects my class and status, Sir Edward. I'm not very interested in bog monsters. I thought I might bring something one might actually enjoy." And as he says this, we see 3 women wheel out a very large platter with a cover on it. And when I say large, I mean it's like 4 feet long by 2 feet wide, which definitely dwarfs all the other platters that are on the table. Then another of the members says, "Good show, Sir Norman. I had a nasty feeling we'd have to expel you tonight." But Sir Norman doesn't really pay attention to this. He turns to the servers who just pushed the large table out with his platter and says, "You may leave the room, ladies." And then Sir Edward sarcastically asks, "Where did you find this little dish, Sir Norman? Burger King? McDonald's, perhaps?" And then Sir Norman gives an evil smile as he begins to lift the lid off of the platter, and he says, "I have selected a meal which we have often seen, but never tasted, gentlemen." Then we turn the page, and the lid is fully removed now, And instead of what we thought was going to be there, which was Scooby, we see it's actually Jerry, the blonde-haired boy from the beginning. And he is hogtied and nude except for his underwear. And upon seeing this, Sir Edward exclaims, "Good God, Norman, you can't be serious." And as Jerry looks around at all these older men standing around him, he begins to cry and he says, "Please, don't do this. I'm only 10. But no one listens to him. And in fact, Sir Norman begins to push the table over to the other gentleman, and he says, "I have satisfied the most important rule of our club, gentlemen. Now dine with me tonight on this innocent flesh, or I shall be forced to expel every one of you." Then we turn the page and we see all of the men now sitting in the smoking room, assumedly after they've eaten Jerry. And no one is talking to each other. They're just kind of sitting and staring like they don't quite know what to say to each other after that. And over these panels, the narration says, "The gentlemen retired to the smoke room to discuss their dilemma. It was a cold night, and they warmed themselves by the fire with glasses of rich port. Sir Norman said nothing, watching the others as they squirmed in their seats. Outside, something howled at the moon." Then we turn the page, and it turns out that Jerry is not dead yet, and in fact, the men have not yet eaten their final meal. I guess they wanted it to be extra fancy, so they set up a whole presentation of Jerry on this large dining table for the men. And as the female servers do this, Jerry's pleading with them, saying, "You don't understand. I've got a mom and dad. Please, people will be looking for me. My mom will have called the police. You'll all be in trouble. Please don't let them eat me." But the women don't show any emotion on their face. They just do their job, walk out, and shut the door. So as Jerry waits by himself in this room to be eaten, on the table next to him, we see the disembodied head of Swamp Thing that Sir James had brought. And Jerry kind of looks at it, and it kind of freaks him out even more. So he closes his eyes tight, and over these panels, the narration says, "Jerry cried for more than an hour, but nobody cared. He looked into the face of the first course and felt his heart sink. It was all so hopeless. If only he hadn't been out on his own. If only he hadn't gone looking for his little lost dog." And in the last panel of this page, there's a zoom in on Swamp Thing's discarded head, and there's something glinting in one of the eye sockets, but we can't quite make it out. We can just see that there's probably something metallic in there. And then we turn the page and we cut to an alleyway back in town, and we see Jerry and his friend from school talking, and Jerry says, "Well, this is it. This is where those guys gave my dad a price for Scooby 1 year ago today." And right there, that's some interesting information, because I guess all the stuff that we had seen with Jerry being put on the table naked and everything was later this evening, which was a year after the whole Scooby incident. And Jerry continues telling his friend, "Dad was having a pee in this alley when they tapped him on the shoulder. Pissed as a fart, I bet. Then they came over to the house later and took Scooby." And Jerry's friend replies, "The dog's been gone for a year, Jerry. You're never going to see him again." And Jerry replies, "I had a dream about him last night. He told me I was in danger. He said he had to come back to help me one last time." And Jerry's friend seems kind of weirded out by this, because he replies, "You're getting weird, Jerry. I'm going down to the arcade." But Jerry begs, "Don't go, Barry. Just stay 10 minutes. I'll give you half a packet of Murray mints." And he pulls out the mints to show them to his friend. But his friend just keeps walking, and he turns as he walks out of the alley and says, "Nah, keep them. I'm off sweets for Lent." And we see Jerry sadly sit down on a pile of old papers in this alley, and we see in his hand is Scooby's old collar, and as he looks down at it, the narration says, "His mother had bought Scooby when Jerry was just 5 years old. He was a stupid pup who chased ice cream vans and took 18 months to house train. Scooby slept at the bottom of his bed every night and waited for him at the school gates every afternoon. Jerry couldn't believe his best pal was really gone." And at that, Jerry begins to cry, but then all of a sudden, a horse and buggy roll up in front of the alley, and someone says out of the carriage, "Why are you out so late in the dark? What do you seek, little boy?" So Jerry approaches the carriage and he says, I knew you'd come. Scooby told me in my dream. I want to buy my dog back." And then we see in Jerry's hand, he pulls from his pocket a bunch of money, and he continues, "I've saved up 60 pounds. That's a ton or more than you paid my dad." But Jerry isn't noticing that the man in the carriage is actually coming out the other side, And he actually walks up behind Jerry and he says, "Shh, you be a good boy now. Don't scream." And as Jerry turns and sees the man coming for him, he says, "Oh no, please." But it's too late. Sir Norman has, I guess, knocked out Jerry and pulled him into the carriage. And he says, "We'll make sure you see your little dog again." Then we cut back to present where all the men are waiting in the smoking room before dinner. And I guess Sir Edward has had enough because he decides to speak up and he says, "For heaven's sake, Sir Norman, we can't eat the boy. It's against the law." And Sir Norman replies, "Don't be so naive. The law doesn't apply to people like us. We can do anything we want." And then another man in the room turns to Sir Edward and says, "He's right, old man. There won't even be an inquiry." And then Sir Norman adds, "What's more important, the spawn of some semi-literate scrounger or membership in our country's most exclusive club? You decide, Sir Edward." And Sir Edward stands from the couch and he pleads his case saying, "But it's cold-blooded murder. This club is sponsored by the Prince of Wales, for God's sake." And then Sir Norman walks up to him and says, "You were always a stout believer in democracy, Sir Edward. Let's put it to a vote. All those who wish to let the child go free, say aye." And of course, everybody in the room is very silent, even Sir Edward. And then Norman addresses a man that we saw come up the stairs in a wheelchair, but we haven't seen talk yet, and he says, "What about you, Sir Alec? Should we eat the child?" And Sir Edward is freaked out by the thought of that, and he says, "For God's sake, Norman, you're asking the Queen's cousin if he wants to indulge in cannibalism?" But then Sir Alec from his wheelchair says, "Marvelous." So it seems like he's down to eat this child. And as Sir Alec says this, Sir Norman gets a very big smile on his face and he says, "Then it's decided. We dine at midnight." Then we turn the page and we cut to midnight and we see all the men sitting around the table where Jerry is still bound and gagged and he's still next to the Swamp Thing head. And Sir Norman says to everybody, "Before we begin, I'd like to propose a toast. Let's raise our glasses to the poor. At last, I believe they've found their true vocation." Then all the men take a drink, and as Sir Edward drinks, he says, "Oh, for God's sake." And then the man next to him leans over and says, "I'm surprised to find you so squeamish, Sir Edward. The young lads in Paddington Green paint a different picture of you entirely." And as Sir Edward takes another drink, he says, "They're lying, little bastards. They'll say anything for money." And as he says this, we can see he's starting to sweat. But as they're talking, they're cut off by Sir Norman, who gets a carving knife and fork ready. And as he's about to cut into the Swamp Thing head, he thinks, "I think our customary prayer would be somewhat inappropriate this evening. I suggest we begin at once." And just as he says that, all of a sudden the Swamp Thing head begins to grow vines. And Sir Norman shouts out, "Good Lord!" And another yells, "What's happening, Sir Norman? What's wrong with the salad?" And we can see that the vines are actually forming the shape of something until the last panel when we see it forms the shape of a big dog. And the dog is standing over Jerry and it's growling and showing its teeth to all the men. And Sir Norman sees this dog and yells out, "Oh Lord!" Then he begins to piss himself and he says, "We weren't going to hurt him, I swear." But it is too late. The dog lunges for Sir Norman and he yells out, "Help! Somebody help me!" But it's too late. No one can help him, of course. So the dog actually lands on top of him on the floor, and we can't see exactly what the dog's doing, but there's definitely a lot of blood pouring out of his upper torso. And one of the other men yells out, "Oh God, it's killing him! It's got Norman!" And then all the men take off running for the doors, but as they get there, one says, "Oh Christ, the door's locked! We're trapped! We can't get out!" Then from the outside of the door, we hear the dog howl, and as we turn the page, we see that the dog has killed all the men in the room. And the only one left alive is little Jerry, who has gotten on his knees on top of the platter, and he looks over to the dog and he says, "Don't hurt me, please. Oh God." But as the plant dog jumps on the table, we see that he does not attack the boy. He actually starts biting at the ropes that are binding the boy's arms, and the narration says, "Heavy moss stumps tread across the table, mahogany claws scraping into the polished finish. Its breath is hot and sick, reeking of shit and old man's meat. So as Jerry's ropes are cut free, he looks into the dog's face, and the narration continues. I came back for you, it tells him with its eyes. I love you. And Jerry stares at the dog with shock in its eyes as he realizes that he knows this dog, and he says, Scooby? And then he gives the dog a big hug, and he says, Oh, thank you, God. Thank you. I knew I'd get him back. I just knew it. And then we see in the panels of the boy hugging the dog that the dog begins to kind of come undone and just turn back into vines again. And the narration says, It whimpers like a pup and licks his face, and he holds it so tight, promising to never let it go again. But its back goes soft, and his fingers slide through the rib cage, and its features melt into nothing. Everything that was his little dog drips off the end of the table. Then we see Jerry crying as he tries to grab onto the last of the vines as they fall off of him, and he whimpers to himself, Good boy, good boy. And in the last panel, we're just left with the room full of dead bodies and carnage, and Jerry sitting in the middle of a bunch of vines on the table. And the narration says, But he still refuses to let go. Then we cut to Jerry's house with his parents, and the mom is asking, How much did you get? Then we see the dad with an envelope in his hands, and he's counting the money inside, and he says, Not much. 85 quid and 64 pence. And the mom says, Poor Jerry. I wonder where he is now. And as the dad gets into bed with the mom, he says, They said it's best not to think about it. We're still young enough to have another one when we get back on our feet. At least they gave us something to remember him by. And then the mom reaches over and turns the light off and says, Yeah, I suppose so. And the dad reaches over and gives her a hug and says, Good night, baby. Sweet dreams. Then we see on the dad's dresser are the shoes of Jerry, which I guess are the items that they were given to remember Jerry by. So these horrible parents sold their child and their dog to these horrible old people, knowing that they would be eaten or at least killed or something. And that is the end of the issue. That was a fun little one-off story. I don't quite understand how Scooby came to life, but I'm going to go with it because it was pretty cool seeing this giant, mastiff swamp dog tear into all those gentlemen. So with that, if you guys have any comments, questions, or suggestions, you can email me at planestrains.and-comicbooks, all one word, @gmail.com. And remember, until next time, stay swampy.